Greetings, fellow book lovers, and welcome back to Colin's Corner. Today we'll be doing a spoiler-free review of Deadhouse Gates, which is book 2 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. But before we get into today's video, we have to go over the answer for the last Comedy with Colin segment, where I asked you guys the joke, why did the ghost go to rehab? The answer? Because he was addicted to booze. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get on with today's review. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Lord, Deadhouse Gates was a step up in almost every single way, for me personally, over Gardens of the Moon, which I loved, by the way, and I'm going to make a bit of a strange real-life comparison to how these two books made me feel. And so my family grew up celebrating Christmas, and Gardens of the Moon to me felt like walking downstairs on Christmas morning, right? There's gifts everywhere, and all you want to do is just run around and open all the gifts. And that's what I felt like I was doing with Gardens of the Moon. I had no idea what each story arc was trying to do, who the characters were, what they were, what types of magic were in this world. I didn't care. I was running around, theoretically, running around this book, opening different presents, and just seeing what Erikson was giving me, what Erikson was gifting to the reader. And it felt like for a lot of it, there wasn't a ton of rhyme or reason. I'd get really excited about this story arc or this present, and then I'd see another one over here, and I'd want to go read about that or open that present, and I don't know, it just felt like kind of chaotic, but in a really exciting and fun kind of way. And Deadhouse Gates felt a little bit more to me like maybe sitting down with one of the toys and starting to figure out how it works, what makes this toy tick, what its potential is. That's what Deadhouse Gates kind of felt like for me. I felt a little bit more settled in to Erikson's writing style. I was able to pay more attention to things like his foreshadowing, his humor, which a lot of it was probably lost to me with just the way my mind was being blown in Gardens of the Moon, but I felt a little bit more calm going through this, a little bit more ready for what I was going to be getting, if that makes sense. So, I don't know, that was just a weird, like, real-life parallel that kind of made me think about how I felt about these two books that I thought was kind of fun. But let's get into what Deadhouse Gates is about. So, in Gardens of the Moon, if you remember, we are on the continent of Genebakis, and the main plot had set its sights on the city of Darujhistan, eventually. And so Darujhistan was the last free city on the continent of Genebakis, and the Empress Lysine was aiming all of her power towards obtaining Darujhistan and eliminating it as a rival to her reign. Now, shifting to Deadhouse Gates, we are moving to a completely different continent called the Seven Cities, which at first was a little bit shocking, but however, there are many hints throughout Gardens of the Moon that I remember hinting at the Seven Cities being a continent that is on the cusp of rebellion. So when Deadhouse Gates opened and I knew where we were going to be, I was excited to see what that was going to look like. Right from the beginning of this book, there is a sense that the tone in Deadhouse Gates is going to be much more serious. Not that an empire taking over a continent isn't serious, like what was happening in Gardens of the Moon, but I'm not sure. Right off the bat, I just felt this book was much, much heavier. The prologue opens up with some extremely dark and just hard to process stuff. So basically, Empress Lysine has a new adjunct, and her name is Adjunct Tavor. Adjunct Tavor happens to be Ganos Perron's older sister, if you remember from Gardens of the Moon. And what Empress Lysine is currently executing is what she's calling the Cull of Nobility. She is executing or enslaving the heads of or members of all of the noble families to, again, eliminate all the threats to her reign. To get an even bigger idea of how messed up all of this is, I believe the very first POV character that we get in Deadhouse Gates is of a girl named Felicin. Now, Felicin is actually the youngest sister of Adjunct Tavor and Ganos Perron, But if you remember again, like I had to have my memory refreshed, but the Perrin family is a noble family. So what happens is that the adjunct Tavor has actually enslaved her youngest sister as a part of this culling of the nobility. And it's really kind of hard to wrap your head around the idea of that. Tavor gets named to be the adjunct, and then all of a sudden the Empress wants her to enslave her own, not only her own people, but her own family. And that was just a heck of a way to open this book. And, Erikson in this prologue exposes us to just the absolute horrors of enslavement. We see in detail how ugly and horrifying the treatment of these noble slaves were, the brutality of like the transport of the slaves, because they're moving the slaves from the city of Hisar to this mining camp, and just like the transport of just hundreds and hundreds of slaves and how they were treated while they were making this move was just so difficult to read about. And especially unthinkable things like how specifically women, enslaved women, were treated. Erikson did not shy away from any of this, and it was very hard to read, but extremely, extremely compelling. Like, I found myself glued to the page, not out of enjoyment per se, but just awe of how he just portrayed what this would feel like if you were in the shoes of Felicin or one of the enslaved members of the noble families. And did I mention that all this is in the prologue? While all of this is going on in the city of Hisar, there are a whole heap of other events happening across the continent, but the main overarching plot of Deadhouse Gates to me seemed to be the rebellion against the Empire and how that looked on the Seven Cities. So, from a desert called Raraku, there is allegedly a seer. Her name is Shaik, and she is attempting to lead the rebellion, which is essentially this prophetic event that is referred to as the Whirlwind. And essentially what Deadhouse Gates does is, in a wonderfully beautiful way, provide the plot threads of many different groups of characters, all being either contributing to the rebellion or being affected by the coming of the whirlwind and all of the other just societal turmoil that is going on the Seven Cities continent. The different characters in this book, similarly to in Gardens of the Moon, are sometimes together, but lots of times are hundreds, if not thousands of miles apart, and each of the groups of characters are affecting different aspects of the plot, but the anticipation of some of them eventually somehow intertwining, or just hoping that some of these plot threads were going to intertwine, was one of the most exciting parts about this book. Is just kind of theorizing as I was going along, like, why am I learning about what's going on over here? Like, why is Erikson delving so deep into this, and how is all of this going to tie in? Like, the scope in Gardens of the Moon and the scope in Deadhouse Gates are just something that's completely new to me in terms of the vastness of it, and I'm having a really fun time because it's a unique reading experience for that reason and many other reasons. Just kind of picturing how massive the scales really are in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Another plot thread that I won't dive too deeply into due to spoiler reasons, but that I do want to touch on, was the storylines of Diker and Coltane. So Coltane is a Wiccan war leader who is put in command of the Malazan 7th Army, and he has orders to escort Malazan civilians out of the rebelling Seven Cities and to the capital city of Erin for safety. This storyline of Coltane escorting these refugees was some of the most riveting storytelling that I have read in fantasy, bar none. I was hooked, glued, stuck to the pages for everything that had to do with Coltane. The main reason that I think I was so intrigued, other than the fact that it was just beautifully and very skillfully written, was the way that Erikson decided to portray the events that were happening that were related to Coltane. So mostly everything that we know and see about Coltane throughout this entire book is given to us through the eyes of Diker, who is a historian for the Malazan Empire. So Diker is responsible for recording all of the events that happen to Coltane, or as a result of Coltane's march from Hisar to Erin. And we just see it from a bird's eye view. We see all of the ingenious military tactics that Coltane has planned. And it's funny because for a lot of this, we get Diker just questioning, like, why is he doing this? What is the goal here? How are we going to get through this area where we're surrounded and completely outnumbered? And then we get to see Diker, who has like a little helper kind of like positioning him in different places. We get to see Diker like get his mind blown by watching the genius of Coltane as he navigates through the land and through all of the different obstacles that he has to navigate to get to his goal. And I've never read something like that through the eyes of the historian, but it was so incredibly just compelling to read how Diker was seeing all these events. And I thought that it was an absolutely genius stylistic choice by Erikson. Some of my other favorite characters that I just want to briefly mention from Deadhouse Gates were, and I liked pretty much all the storylines, but another one is Kalam, who we met in Gardens of the Moon, and he's kind of on his own like side mission throughout the entirety of this book, like in the background. And it's not a small side mission. It is a mission that, if successful, has extremely large implications for the world at large. So he was a really interesting and fun storyline to follow. And another one that we get to meet in Deadhouse Gates is a guy named Iskeral Pust, who I think seems to be a little bit of a fan favorite from what I've heard after finishing the book. But he is the High Priest of Shadows, and is very reminiscent of Kruppa from Gardens of the Moon in the vibes that I get from him in this book. He's sort of quirky and would audibly like narrate his inner thoughts in this funny but kind of psychotic way. But the whole time I had this sense that there was a lot more to him than what met the eye. There were a ton of themes in this book, but I just want to point out a few that really stuck out in my reading experience, and that was themes of prostitution, enslavement, addiction, torture, perseverance, and genocide. So obviously, you know, I tossed perseverance in there. There's certainly some hope, but the overall tone of Deadhouse Gates, very, very heavy, and hard to say that, you know, it's a fun read, but it was unbelievably compelling. And a large portion of the reason that it was so compelling was Erikson's handling of these really tough to talk about and touchy themes. And I'm a reader that really likes to know some themes going into books that might be explored, and especially with how heavy this book is, I just wanted to give a little bit of a brief heads up to somebody that may not want to read about some of these heavier themes. So these are explored in this book, but they are done, in my opinion, with great taste, and they are handled very well by Erikson. But it is a very heavy book, like I've said probably a million times at this point. I can't really get too deep into the themes for spoiler reasons, but that is going to lead me into a question that I wanted to pose to you guys that have been watching not only my channel, but specifically the Malazan videos. I am kind of having a little bit of a difficult decision deciding how I want to approach these reviews moving forward. I want to review all of the books that I read in the Malazan Book of the Fallen because I believe it's helping me to unpack what's going on in these books. But more importantly, I want more people to read them. And so I know that, you know, after this book, we're getting to the third book of a 10-book series. Do you guys, here's the question, do you guys prefer spoiler-free, completely spoiler-free reviews? Do you like the idea of maybe doing a non-spoiler for the first part, spoiler for the second part? Or would you just like an entirely spoiler review? I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to handle it moving forward, but I would love your guys' input. The Malazan fans that have found my Gardens of the Moon review video and have found the Discord channel have been super, super awesome. This fandom seems to be extremely welcoming and just want more people to be fans of the series, and they get excited when they find new fans. So I want to make sure that, I'm providing you guys with some stuff that you want to see and that you want to engage with. So let me know how you feel about how you want me to structure the reviews going forward, and I will certainly take all of that into consideration when I move forward with Memories of Ice and onward. All in all, I think that with the second installment in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, Deadhouse Gates was a noticeable step up in Erikson's skill as a writer. I think that for me, the narrative was much more cohesive. I think Erikson's prose was phenomenal throughout the entirety of this book. Not that it was poor in Gardens of the Moon, but I just felt like I was flowing with the book better, maybe, than I was in Gardens of the Moon. And don't get me wrong, I was still very overwhelmed by a lot that was going on with this book, and I by no means have all of this figured out. I am lost in a lot of different areas, but I seem to have just a better general foothold on how Erikson displays his stories as a storyteller, and I'm getting more used to his writing style and enjoying it a lot. So, like I said before, I don't know that Deadhouse Gates was necessarily a fun read, but I think that it was the most compelling read of the year so far for me personally. And if this is only the second book in the series, I cannot imagine where this is all going to go. A few things to note for anyone that has been following along the read-along, either on the Discord or on my channel. We will be doing a discussion at some point for Deadhouse Gates, but as of right now, that has not been determined as of when we're going to do that yet. And we will also be continuing with Memories of Ice after we do the discussion, and I am personally not going to start the third book in the series until after we do the discussion, because I really enjoy the idea of all of the participants in the chat being in the same exact spot in terms of knowing where things are in the storyline. Like, I don't want to read more than the other members or read ahead, and I like that we've all read the same amount and we all know the same amount, because I think it really is more fun that way to theorize and wonder about what's going to go on in the next book and not have to like hold back and reserve knowledge and stuff like that. So I'm going to hold off until after we do the discussion, but as soon as we decide on a date, we will let you guys know in the various social media outlets that we have, and of course here on YouTube. So that is going to do it for my review of Deadhouse Gates Book 2 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. If you've read this book, I want to know what your experience was. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Deadhouse Gates. Before we go, we of course have to do comedy with Colin, and today's joke is going to be, why shouldn't you tell secrets in a cornfield? If you enjoyed today's video, please like it and share it if you're compelled to do so. Also, if you have been watching the channel or watching the Malazan videos and you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. That way you can follow me through my journey through the Malazan Book of the Fallen and through many of the other wonderful worlds that we readers get to experience. I hope you are all enjoying what you're currently reading, and remember, you're always welcome in Colin's Corner.